everyone. Welcome to Adobe Live. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Voodoo Val, and I get to host the one and only Sin Lagos this morning. How are you, Sin?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited that you're my host today.
I'm pumped, and I'm especially excited because what you have planned today is like specifically what I have been hunting for knowledge about. So I'm super
Hmm.
excited. Before we kind of do an intro of what you've got planned today, and tell a little bit about you, I would love to remind everyone in the chat that if you haven't already, please subscribe to our Adobe Live YouTube channel. That is where you can get so many updates and things on all of the fun stuff that we are doing here on Adobe Live. And I would also like to welcome all of you folks into the chat. I see Wade and Sean,
Yeah.
Oliver, Steve. What's going on, everybody? Say hello. Feel free to fill the chat with questions if you have any as we go along today. But without further ado, Sin, tell us about you. I want to know what you're working on today, what you've been working on recently, and your favorite flavor of pizza. That's what I want to
Oh,
know. The real
flavor of
questions.
pizza?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
That's
pizza
not where my
topping.
mind went.
Yeah.
Flavor of
I asked
ice
the real
cream on
questions.
pizza?
Let's
Well,
not
hi.
get too crazy.
Yeah, let's not. So, hi everyone. My name is Sin Lagos. I am a visual storyteller with a focus on graphic design, photography, and film. Of which we would be talking about today. I'm really excited that Val is also pumped to see this because we're going to be focusing on sort of an intro version to Premiere for those of you who want to just get your feet wet and get a little bit more accustomed to how to navigate the application. Also, I will be using a lot of my phone footage, so it's much easier to grasp. I'm sure we all have footage in our phones, so we'll get a sense of what those look like in Premiere. Also, what have I been working on lately? Quite honestly, it's been so awesome to dive deeper into film in general. I think as most of you might be able to relate, I am a self-taught creator. So
Mhm.
jumping from graphic design to photography to now film has been really amazing. And I realized film has another element, which is to be an editor, right?
Mm,
Like to be cool editor. So I'm
yeah.
getting into the flow and I'm excited to share that with you all. So
Well,
hi
I'm
everyone
super
on the chat.
pumped.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
pumped.
welcome in everybody. And yeah, I'm super excited just to see how you kind of dive into this. And you said that you're using a lot of footage from your phone. And personally,
Yeah.
I've been really struggling with kind of how to combine stuff that I have on my phone with what I have created in other places on other
Mm.
devices, and how to make that look super cohesive for something like a reel or
Right.
something. So
Yes.
I'm pumped. So let's dive into it.
Yeah, reels are all the rage right now.
Hmm.
Definitely a lot of this can be repurposed for reels. The dimensions of reels also
Hmm.
fit into your stories. And also we're going to be playing a little bit about with reframing so
Hmm.
that we can also push it out to YouTube if we need to.
Yeah.
So let's get started. Yeah. So I have Premiere already opened up. And I feel like the first thing I want to jump into, which can be a little bit daunting, is always the how do I get organized and how what are these specs, these like
Hmm.
trivial words and numbers, right? So we're
Hmm.
going to start right away with new project, and Premiere's already improved a lot of the user interface here to make it really accessible for us to be able to visually see what steps we need to take in order to get started. So the first thing it asks me is, what files do I want to import and what do I want to call my project, right? Kind of
Hmm.
vice versa, the opposite order. So I'm going to call this project New York. So my footage is from a New York trip. So that's going to be really cool to kind of show you guys. So New York, and I'm going to call it version 1, right? It's really good to just kind of keep track of all your versions. We always like to play around. So I have a few folders here at my reach. I have already uploaded some of my favorites. So what you usually do here, whenever you select a folder, you can actually decide to star and favorite that folder, and it'll appear here in your favorites, so that you have access in the future.
Hmm.
This does come at a little bit of a shortcoming if you have files that live in the cloud. For me, my cloud of choice is Google. So if it lives in the cloud, it's a little bit trickier, but these are actually native in my desktop, so I'm good to go, right? So I'll get to access them fairly easily. So I'm going to go in here, and in my folder, I'm going to show you what that looks like actually. And slow me down if you guys need me to. That's also important. So in my folder, you can see how that appears. So this is a little bit more familiar to us, right? So what I've done in here is I've collected my footage from my phone. So my phone footage looks like this. This is us, my wife and I, having fun with the hotel people.
This is great.
And I also look like a character, so I was like, oh, this is giving me like, I don't know, just like a movie vibe. So I wanted to do that.
Very
Wes Anderson vibes. That's what it was. Yeah,
for sure.
So I did not choose that outfit based on that, but now it looks exactly accurate. So I've decided to create a bit of a story structure for myself, even in the folder section of things. So our creativity already begins here. So I have an intro, I have my outro, I have the main body of my work. So imagine this is over here. So intro, main body, and outro. So in here, I have collected the footage that I think will fit within those sections. So I put 3 different sections for main: when we are in the museum, when we commute, when we get to the museum, and finally when we have coffee. So of course, I keep a folder for my working file and ready for web. Very simple. And you'll see that reflected right here, right? So that's really cool. We know that these two are just our structure files, but these have our footage. So I'm going to bring in these folders.
So we're getting to see like the behind the scenes of the final product here, but then you're saying you should really be organizing like behind the scenes, like from how you have everything organized on your computer so it looks nice and organized once you get in to start putting it together.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you personally, this part was very daunting. It's hard to pick footage beforehand, but if you have that structure in mind, it kind of makes everything a little bit easier to pick from all the choices that you collected. I'm sure you probably, hit record quite a bit of time. So yeah, that's why.
We have a question for you as well. Just kind of back to what you were talking about using the cloud. Laura says, when your files are in the cloud, do you then duplicate them into your local drive for the Premiere project, or do you get them from the cloud?
Well, that's actually an interesting question, because another way of actually bringing your files is just to drag and drop, and I'll show you what that looks like, and that will be just fine. It just doesn't show you this interface. I would say that's the only gap there. So in new bin, I'm going to actually create a bin called clips. So I know that these are my video clips, and that's that. I can actually name my sequence here if I want to. So always try to name it, just because our sequence can get lost fairly quickly, especially once we start playing with it and start adding effects and things like that. So New York for me. Okay.
All right. So as we get into this, do you have anything about your workspace specifically that you've changed from the default Premiere workspace that you feel really helps kind of make your workflow a little more seamless or a little more natural to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the things that are going to be helpful for you is to just like understand the user experience here in general. It's a good question. Customizing all of these panels are modular, which means that I can pull them in any space and I can make them my own. If I decide that I actually want to see all my files on the right-hand side, that can be done. So that is a good question, because in general, you want to create a space that's going to make it easy for you to come back to it and feel encouraged to work in it for long hours, right? So for me, I'm using at the moment this because it will be the one that you will see first. Because I have 2 monitors, oftentimes I actually have only my timeline here, and it will look something like this.
Oh, okay. So you kind of drag
Yeah.
them off into a completely different space to really get them.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
So
awesome.
then I'm often looking in this direction and in that direction. And it's really cool because if you think about it, the timeline stacks a lot of different footage and audio. So having my right monitor, sometimes vertical, even helps to be able to have that visibility without skipping over. But if you don't have that and you don't have all that extra gear, that's okay, because you just hit that squiggly line right above the tab. Still don't know the name of that thing.
I think
but
it's the tilde key.
Tilde key.
Yeah.
So the tilde key, and as you're able to sort of select any panel you have here and just hit the tilde key, and it'll zoom in into that area, right? So if I select this, it zooms in into that area.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, I remember that. I just think Tilda Swinton, where's she at? And then
yeah, there you go. Yeah, there's all these little shortcuts that start to kind of make your life a little easier. I know that when I edit on my MacBook, which is fairly tiny, this is very important because I have no other option.
Oh yeah.
And it's and so it zooms in and uses the entirety of the space. So what you'll see here that in our timeline, so for those of you that really haven't dived into anything that has to do with video, our timeline is pretty much a space, almost like a time machine, is a space where we get to travel across a certain amount of time. And with our playhead, we kind of determine what we see here in our preview, right? So right away, it already placed some of my files, all of my files in here. And that's not really what I want. It's kind of handy if you already you want to kind of get started like this, but some of these clips aren't cut at the spaces that I want. So I still want to review them. So I don't actually want that to happen. So I'm going to delete them for now.
Okay.
So we were asking the question about, let me see if I can pull this up. We're asking the question about when things live on the cloud. Dragging and dropping is another method to bring in your clips, right? Okay. So right now it's not going to do it because I already have those clips in here, but dragging and dropping will actually create those folders and honor the names that you've already created on your Finder window.
Nice.
So that's another way to do that. Awesome. So let's get started here with some of our clips. I'm actually going to probably do that first. Let me delete that and bring in what I've created. Yeah, so I have my organization still here. And then these don't create a folder for some reason because they're individual. Don't know why that is, but you can always create it here by just creating a new bin and creating an intro.
And then you can kind of sort them as needed.
Yeah.
Awesome. We got some new folks popping into the chat, by the way. I see RB. Welcome in. It's good to see you. Feel free to ask any questions as you folks go through. It looks like I might have missed a question from Sean. I see Sean. Sean says, Voodoo Val doesn't read my questions. I see how it is. No, Sean. We are buddies. Let me search through. There are different clouds. Yes, indeed, there are different clouds. And I think you said that your cloud of choice
what
is
a statement.
Google. Yes, different clouds.
Yeah.
I feel like Sean's teasing me. And then oh, here we go. Can the floating heads be on the other side? Yeah, I think you are kind of saying that you really can just put whatever you want in your workspace wherever it needs to go. And I imagine that like the same way you might organize your desk and workspace, you can kind of do the same within Premiere to make it a little more natural as you reach for
Yeah.
things, or to however it feels best, like in your brain, um,
Yeah.
kind of customize it. And then I'm sure you could save
Yeah, actually, I
a
was
thing as
going to
well.
mention that. So I love personalizing anything. If you give me like a shirt that I can personalize it, I will do it. Or a
Hmm.
water bottle, you know.
Hmm.
So in this case, yeah, if you change your space, you can always save it. So I have here sin, but we also have some presets here. So if you want to focus in on certain areas of maybe you're focusing on your effects.
Hmm.
Maybe you're looking at your libraries, right? All the assets that live in your libraries. Maybe some of those graphic elements that you have in there. So you get to pick one of these, and then it'll refocus
Hmm.
into that space,
So
right? That's pretty
technically
cool.
you could have like a honestly a custom workspace for each stage in your process too, if you wanted to. So when you're working
Yeah.
on editing in a certain manner, cutting your clips and rearranging them, you could have one. And then when you know you're going to dive into adding some effects, you can switch to that workspace and just focus visually on everything you need there. So a lot of really cool stuff, I'm sure, that you can do as far as maneuvering. And especially
Yeah.
as you say, people are probably going to be doing these projects on very different devices across the board, whether you have a desktop computer with a very large monitor, or more than one monitor, or you're working on a laptop, as you mentioned, where navigating that workspace becomes, kind of an art form so that you can feel comfortable on a small screen.
Yeah, that's
Um,
exactly right. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
you
a
could
it
really maneuver.
yeah, yeah, I hope you dive into this because I think you're getting a good grasp of the whole idea.
I'm super pumped.
Yeah.
I'm containing it, but we also got some more questions coming in. And Laura
Awesome.
says, do you always shoot in landscape and then reframe for vertical, or switch between shooting and both orientations?
That's honestly a phenomenal question. I think it's a question I ask myself. Like, oh, it's a little like disheartening because sometimes I would go to places and only shoot in vertical and then
Mm-hmm.
realize I don't have any footage to share on YouTube now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
everything is absolutely vertical. It's a little bit harder to shift the vertical footage into a landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do often is I try to get it both, right? More is more. Or at the very least, in this case, you'll see that we have a lot of horizontal footage.
Mm-hmm.
So with reframing, we'll be able to kind of repurpose that for vertical.
Mm-hmm.
We do have my phone, currently have a Google Pixel. It does shoot 4K. So that
Okay.
means it gives me some room to zoom in because Instagram only asks for 1080. So that's
Okay.
cool, right? So
Yeah.
we get to zoom in. And if all else fails, we also use our layout skills and start to sort of lay out our footage in different ways that still fits within that vertical space.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think one of the most stressful things that I have come to when it comes to video editing is like shooting a vertical video and then realizing that you want it to be landscape to add it into a project. And I think to myself, well, I did get a good shot composition wise that will allow me to zoom in, but then I realize it's not high quality enough. So then when I zoom in, it doesn't match the same quality as the rest of my clips. But if you have
Right.
the option to shoot in 4K, then you can really kind of zoom in there as needed and make your piece look, more cohesive across the board, in
Yeah,
the
and
breadth of work.
I encourage everyone to dive into the settings of their phone
Hmm.
just to have a better sense of what options do I have here, right? Like the phones boast so many different features every single time they're out, and we sort of look at the outer layer and we wonder like, oh, okay, it's prettier.
Hmm.
I'll buy it, but it's quite a high investment, right? So we want to get the most we can out of it. And I think just diving into the settings oftentimes can show you exactly what it can do, and it can do quite a bit now.
Hmm.
Um, you can actually shoot 60 frames per second, which it's a feature of a digital camera, really. Like they're all they're trying to do is emulate the professional cameras in every way that they can. And
Yeah.
sometimes they really nail it. So I'm very surprised. So what I'm doing here, just to give you guys a little insight into what I'm doing. So I'm hitting the letter I and the letter O. So to kind of dictate what is my starting and ending of the clip that I want to drag into my timeline.
Okay.
So I'm picking like the little areas that, I mean, we recorded this completely. Like I did a lot of little things just to have some variation in my footage, but I'm gonna pick from here what parts are more interesting and what I want to bring in. Now, another thing that I do is I drag only the video. I'm not dragging the video with the audio. If I want to do that, I actually pull the entire video from here.
Okay.
But in this case, I'm just going to drag the video, and that's going to show me this track alone. Right. And I did that, by the way, by just hitting shift plus, right?
Okay.
Shift minus and shift plus. So it gives me that visibility. And if you're not very like good with shortcuts and that's not your thing, there's always an option right here, right? You can zoom in and zoom out. You'll find yourself,
though, like learning them, you know, because I think that's when you dive into any app in the Creative Cloud suite, I think that at least for me personally, even, you know, diving into a new program is daunting. And sometimes I feel a little overwhelmed. Like I don't know where I'm at. I don't know exactly how to do everything. But what I did whenever I learn a new Adobe app or just a new piece of software in general is I figure out what it is that I know I want to do within the program, and I go look up the shortcuts and helpful tools and tips for those things, and I just learn what I need to learn instead of trying to learn every single thing. Just like kind of focus on the tools I think I'll need, and I keep a like a post-it or something somewhere of the shortcuts for the tools that I have found I use most often, and I just glance at it. You know, sometimes it's on one of my other monitors or just sitting on my desk, and sometimes you can exponentially like feel a lot more comfortable within a program if you just have like 3 shortcuts that you start to get comfortable with, you know, and use those, then add 1 or 2 over time. And I think that daunting nervousness being in the program really starts to fade. That's my advice.
So you're definitely shortcut in the side of yes to shortcut.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I give folks that option just because I don't know. I think I often see even my fellow coworkers, they'll go to the place where things are stored, and that gives them comfort knowing where those things are.
Gotcha.
So and I mean, sometimes I forget them because I use so many shortcuts. So I can totally see how that's helpful, right? But the shortcuts in Premiere can be a game changer because it's going to save you time. I think all the keynotes at Adobe Max were all about saving you time in your workflow. So the folks at Adobe are just trying every step so that you can spend less time making these things and actually enjoying the process a lot more, because the steps aren't tedious and sort of taking a long time in your creative process. So in this case, another thing to keep in mind is I try to achieve you can see here, I try to achieve a 3-step, a 3-set sort of footage. So I don't have the right name there for this thing, but I try to find 3 different perspectives essentially of the same scene, so that at least I have 3 different perspectives that give variation to the same moment. And it keeps that attention, right? So I found 3 here. I'm trying to address how long the time should be. Should they be even in time? So for example, one way to keep up, random pro tip here, right? We often share, so if we're thinking in terms of reels have music that we get to select from, and so it's kind of hard to know what's going to match. One of the ways that you can make sure it matches is just to kind of create an even rhythm,
Okay.
right? So if you have something like this with a little bit of variation, so now you have these two at the same tempo, and then you have this one here kind of allowing that maybe shift to the next scene to happen.
Mhm.
And so that's one way that I just have it keep that in mind. Otherwise, I'll play the song here with me, which is often on my phone, and then I'll kind of do that part because it isn't something that I can bring into Premiere because it
Yeah.
lives on Instagram, unless you're getting your own audio, right?
Mhm.
So that's a whole different thing. So it looks a little like this.
I love it. And so you said that you typically grab a few different perspectives or points of view from the same moment, and I think that that's really interesting. And this is probably one of the things that I was really hoping to like understand about you and your work is that when I approach video editing, I would say that my personal video editing is nothing intricate, as it's not something I do as much as like painting or illustration, but I always choose like one video for each moment to show, but I can see how kind of mixing in multiple perspectives of the same moment kind of helps to tell a much broader story or make people
Yeah.
feel a lot more emotionally connected to that. Or like,
Yeah.
even though you're only showing them a few tiny clips, they feel as though they've been there for the entirety of that moment that you're only showing for a
Absolutely.
little bit. So that's a really
Right.
great and interesting approach to that, which I will
Yeah, it
file
kind of
away.
helps. Yeah, it kind of helps. It also helps you because I think one of the hardest parts for me to dive into the editor's hat
Hmm.
has been the, well, how do I choose from all the footage? I mean, all the footage to me
Yes.
is good, and
Yeah.
I attempted to make each one great,
Hmm.
but at which point do I sort of decide and narrow it down to the
Hmm.
ones that I like? I know in photography it was often, okay, well, let me find the hero shot,
Hmm.
but in videography, look what makes one more important than the other. So I started to realize that maybe my golden number was 3, right?
Hmm.
So at least 3 good ones from the same scene, then I have some variety just to keep that attention. And I understand that we're all fighting to keep the attention of the audience or our viewers or our friends online,
Hmm.
but it's definitely one of those things that you just also do to create variation for your footage, not
Yeah.
just to be fast and speedy, right? Speedy Gonzalez on your
Yeah.
footage.
Yeah.
Definitely, it, I would say honor your story above
Hmm.
everything else, right? The rest comes.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to show you guys a resource for fonts, right? So font.adobe.com, in the font pack section, I think is one of
Ooh,
my favorite
yeah.
places to go visit,
Me
just to
too.
get, yeah, just to get a sense. I mean, this resource didn't exist when I started graphic design, so it was really hard to just get a sense of like what combinations work. I mean,
Hmm.
I envy everyone who's doing design or entering design just now, because this is such a valuable um, space, not only for you to access font
Hmm.
combinations, but also for you to train your mind to
Hmm.
know what font combinations would work better. Like, for example, all these Bauhaus fonts that are just sort of relate to each other, right? They have that same energy, and just look, you can see the fonts here and then directly activate each font.
Yeah.
And so I've done that already, and you can just turn it on. You can see here, I've already turned on a few of them,
Hmm.
and it'll activate within your Adobe program, whichever one you're using, which is
Yeah.
really helpful.
I use this resource often because personally I struggle a lot with pairing fonts and like wondering if what I've chosen is
It's
too
hard.
busy or too, yeah, it's really difficult. But being able to not only go to the font packs and see fonts that people have used together or maybe created to go together, but also to see the
Right.
graphics that they upload for those packs and different ideas for how it can be used can be really inspiring and make you feel a lot more confident in your choices. So I agree. We're on the same page about a lot of things today, Thin.
I know. I'm always watching your live stream, so that makes complete
Oh,
sense.
thank you. I
Yeah, yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, I was like, I told my wife, I was like, oh my God, Val is my host today.
Oh, stop.
This is awesome.
I was just saying I get to host Sin. It's gonna be
Yeah.
great. So
That's so funny, right? Like the way we connect online.
hmm for sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to create a title here. So because we are treating this as almost like a mini short,
Mhm.
I like to introduce a title of sorts that give the viewer a sense of what we're going to talk about, or like what they're about to view. And you know, feel free to just like be goofy about it if you want to, or just kind of be straightforward. This is New York, so
Mhm.
I'll let them know ahead of time, right? Like that's an interesting way. It also serves as a way for me to have sort of a cover in my intro
Mhm.
that can be showcased when the viewers are just, you know, viewing and scrolling, right?
Mhm.
So I'm going to be using this really cool font that I cannot pronounce. It's Ekman Psych. It sounds like a sound effect, but it's so cool, right? It's just as
Mhm.
cool as the name, I think. It's like
Mhm.
groovy, a little strange.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of decrease that font actually a little bit there. And you can see here that I've actually named my tracks. I named this text, I named this B-roll. Ideally, below this would be an A-roll, which is usually when you speak to the camera. And
Mhm.
above this, oftentimes it's like I start to propagate like different things like visual effects, or maybe the color editing in
Mhm.
an adjustment layer. So things I know in even in the vertical space, how those things are going to live there. And it gives me a sense of like, okay, the next step is text, the next step is visual effects, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So in this case, we're going to make a fairly easy one, and we're just going to add the text here. And actually, I'm going to have this text introduced with a little bit of an opacity. So I can just come in here and increase press the P just
Mhm.
to get that little pen there, and I can add a keyframe here and here, and I can
Mhm.
bring this down, and that will actually give me
Oh,
a
nice.
quick transition into it, right? So that
Okay.
you can see it just flows in there. Now you can find that also within the effects layers. We have all these presets. So consider these things, settings that have quite literally been preset by somebody else so that you can use and reuse them, right? So
Mhm.
if there's video transitions, some of these can be really uh really kind of tricky to use because you can mess up your entire footage
Yeah.
because they're just so specific. But I love the dissolve section because it's subtle, right? It's kind of one
Mhm.
of those things where like it's not a stylistic choice, where it's like too connected to your who you are.
Mhm.
It's just a subtle touch to the whole thing. So I can add
Yeah.
like at dip to black here, and it comes in a little bit more graceful. And I can also just adjust the distance of that so
Mhm.
it doesn't take up the entirety of my clip.
Yeah, I kind of think of the dissolve effect there less like special effects and more like visibility tools. You know, like I use them and I've seen other people use them very well. And to me, it feels like, you know, you kind of dive in there and using those effects is like the way that you take all of the little components and tiny pieces, all your little ingredients, and you
Yeah.
use those effects to make it flow so it's nice and smooth on the eyes. If that makes sense, that's just kind of how I
Yeah,
see it
it
in my head.
does.
So the nice transitions, things that aren't big and flashy, but definitely help your audience to really take in everything you're showing them rather than being kind of blindsided by certain things. Makes it nice and smooth and buttery. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like there's some elements that give your video a very unique look. And then there's some other things that there will always be these classic choices,
mhm.
right? Like being
Yeah,
able to add bars, which I can show you what that looks like, or you know, being able to add an easy transition so it's not um so harsh when it enters the scene, right? I think that's
yeah.
also very helpful. Yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying. I think it was one of those, it's you have to kind of get an understanding of where how it fits to you,
Mhm.
um how it works for you so that you can then utilize them as the
Mhm.
idea comes up in your head. It's like, oh, I can use that effect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me see here. I wanted to do a really quick graphic effect on this. But look, I'm just browsing through fonts here because why not?
Yeah.
It
I
looks so
think
awesome too.
that I find myself doing stuff like this all the time where it's like I did kind of make the decision for what I'm going to use, but like why not browse through everything just in case accidentally you come across something that's even more fabulous.
Yeah. So I just dropped a distort effect on my font just to make it a little bit wavy
Hmm.
there.
Nice and
And
funky.
yeah, nice and funky. And you can see there that it's just a drag and drop option. So you don't
Hmm.
have to um, really kind of overdo it. And you can
Hmm.
see that it shows up here on my left-hand side. You can see the turbulent displays effect, which we selected here on the right-hand side, right? So
Hmm.
all of the effects live on your top left corner. And again, that's, I kind of want to name it squiggly. So that squiggly lives on the left here. You can just zoom in and see the effects, and you can increase that effect, right?
Hmm.
And
Oh,
start
that's
to
so
make
cool.
something really, really cool. Now you can set keyframes. So I can do
Yeah.
an outro for this. So I can set, that was the amount, right? So I want the amount to look a little like this when it hits this point, but
Hmm.
once it goes a little bit further out as it exits, I want it to be almost like just
Yeah.
completely displaced,
Oh, I love
right?
this.
And then, yeah, and then we can also do that opacity effect that we did earlier so that even as it disappears, it's a little bit more subtle and
Hmm.
graceful,
Oh, this is so
right?
cool.
Yeah, so if we play it, it should look a little like this, right?
Yeah,
So you
just
can
kind of
see.
like it has the sound effects to me in my head. I can
Yeah, it's almost like a visual sound effect.
I can hear the way it looks.
Yeah, and I think it's very fitting also if
Hmm.
you think about it. We can make that a little bit longer too. Just go in here and bring this closer to the end
Hmm.
and go into our keyframes, right? And just drag them further into time. So remember,
Hmm.
this is like a time machine. We can just go further out, and
Hmm.
that ends up happening because it was a little bit too fast. That ends up happening a little later, right? So it acts almost as a transition
Hmm.
to the next clip also. So that's helpful, right?
Yeah.
We can keep those in mind. And that is just our intro. So I'm going to try to dive into the other clips as we
Yeah,
go.
let's do it. I'm gonna scroll through our chat here and just make sure I haven't missed any questions. Looks like
Yeah,
Saima
we
is
don't want anyone to
asking.
get mad.
Yeah, Sean did say it's all love, and I know that because he's one of our good friends here. I knew he wasn't teasing me for real. But Saima says just what so what's the preference like phone camera or professional camera? And it sounds to me like um
You
you
can
you use a
guess?
lot of both. I would
Yeah.
say because you're on the go a lot, I might guess that the phone would be your favorite just because of the freedom you have when you are like on an adventure going. But let us know.
I'm very big on challenging myself to do anything with anything.
Hmm.
Um, so actually I recently recorded a like Thanksgiving promo
Hmm.
in my house with only the phone, but I put it on a
Nice.
very fancy tripod, the
Okay.
whole
Yeah.
like with
Yeah.
an arm, and I'm
Hmm.
like cooking, I was baking something. So I was like, yeah, it's kind of cool. It's still the phone,
Yeah.
but you know how to use the tools that you have at your reach to be able to
Hmm.
just kind of enhance it that much more, or have
Yeah.
that static shot be really, really clean.
Hmm.
So I like both. I do think like just in the effort of trying to teach myself something, using my phone for photography at the time of like Instagram's inception, when we used to
Yeah.
do weekend hashtag projects, I
Hmm.
used to participate in those
Hmm.
with like a really old phone,
Yeah.
and would only like share this in a 1:1 ratio, right? Because that's what
Hmm.
Instagram used to be. That's
Yeah.
how old school was. And
Yeah.
it was only on the phone. It was almost like sacrilegious not to
Hmm.
use your phone.
Yeah.
And that helped me to just do things and practice all the time.
Hmm.
And so I feel like in that same respect, a phone has helped me a lot, and just uh stepping into what is footage and
Mm-hmm.
how can I play with it? What is 60 frames per second? And
Mm-hmm.
what is, like what ratios should I play with? Like vertical, horizontal, like what composite, what attracts me really? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of hard to like point at something and say, wait, hold on, but now it's moving.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Right? It's like I have my composition, but I'm a photographer, so I expected everything to stay still.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the thing that's like crazy for me is like I'm not a photographer, but being an illustrator and a painter, like I feel like I'm still lining up my illustrations the way you might line up your photographs. And so then going and trying to like dip my toes into making videos regularly, I'm like, this would be so much easier for me if none of this stuff, you know, moved around. If it all stayed in one place and then I can like shoot what I need. But it is very similar to still compositions, but also with so much more depth that it can be kind of, honestly, I feel like the best word for it is like an adventure to figure out how to
Yeah.
get the right shot and kind of express the story you're really trying to get across. Um, and I think it's fun, but
Yeah.
I can't deny that it is, I feel a little
It's-
like lost sometimes. And one of the things that I would love to ask you about, like as you're kind of putting these
hmm.
clips and everything together, is we've talked a lot about using the phone camera-wise to get the right shots and using, different resolutions or different ratios for what you're filming and everything. But how do you use the phone microphone for the audio in all of these clips, or do you have something externally recording audio as you go? Because that's something I'm running into where I'm like, I want to record
Mm.
stuff on my phone, but is it acceptable for me to make a voiceover on my iPhone for this video, or is that something that I should be using other devices to do? And is that my own hang up, or is that something that
Yeah.
professionals do? You
As
know?
you start to train sort of your ear and you start to notice, oh wow, that's really echoey, or it did pick up all that noise and
Mm,
in the room. And yeah, you do start to kind of be a little bit more precious about it in the ways that you should, because you want to be good at this. And like
yeah.
professionals are so detail oriented. And so that is a really interesting question. And I think it's actually a question that I also see um like the phones taking into account, right?
Hmm.
They're improving their audio at every turn. So I'm starting to notice that too, right? Like we
Hmm.
rely on using a phone's audio sometimes for just voiceover, and
Yeah.
that's an interesting trend I started to see. I use a Google Pixel, so it is a little bit my insight may feel a little bit different, but I do in my settings I do have a voice improvement, so it
Oh,
actually it knows how to isolate the noises around me, and
okay.
it's like a drastic difference. You can
Oh.
just hear it. I sound like I'm a little bit closer to you. My voice sounds a little bit warmer also,
Hmm.
so it's really nice, right? When I'm not using that, if you want to use an external mic, I do have a Rode lavalier mic
Hmm.
that I bought a little cable for, which is specifically for a phone. It has these
Hmm.
three little lines. That's what makes it different.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, so you put it on the phone, and I actually recorded a lot of my voiceover for that Friendsgiving
Yeah.
recipe that I recorded, which you can check it out once it comes out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and I did it with that because I was so far away from the camera that
Hmm.
I had no choice. I needed to be able to have that feeling of closeness. And so
Hmm.
I had the mic close to me on a little
Hmm.
tripod right
That
next to
is
me.
so great. See, and this is why I was so excited to be here today, because I did not even think of like using a lav
Yeah.
mic with my iPhone. I was just thinking like, do I need to, create this whole project, get my footage with my phone, and then do a voiceover later? But it's kind of like, depending on how you organize your project or whatever, the inspiration for what you want to say and everything sometimes comes to me while I'm making the content, and not necessarily later when I have an opportunity to overthink what it is I want to say. And so for those moments of, inspiration, I'd like to be able to say what I got to say right there when I'm filming the video and everything,
Yeah.
instead of later on, because sometimes those are the most impactful moments verbally for whatever message you're getting across. And so I think I will actually try that. I will get a lav mic and use it with my
Yeah.
phone and see how that
Yeah, that
works.
it does help. And I mean, in general, if you do create that investment,
Hmm.
it is something that you can still use even for your Zoom calls
Hmm. Yeah.
on your computer.
Hmm.
Those professional calls that sometimes, get us these amazing huge projects.
Yeah.
I think they need a little nurture there too.
Hmm.
Or in general, just I do use my DSLR camera so to
Hmm.
record. I'm teaching classes on Skillshare, so I'm
Oh, nice. Yeah.
recording myself all the
Hmm.
while, and self-producing was one of my motivations to learn to do film, because I wanted to be able to have that access to just record myself and
Yeah.
then teach how
Hmm.
what I know so many things, and definitely having that freedom is really helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. That's a great idea. And then I have one question for you from Primatus real quick, which I think is an interesting question. Why make an
Yeah.
intro and outro for Reels if Reels keep looping? And
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen looping
Yeah.
Reels, and I've also seen Reels that have a very clear distinction between their beginning and their end. So I'd love to hear why you made that choice.
Right. That's so interesting. Well, I'll tell you, I think the answer is definitely a creative one, right?
Hmm.
Because it's um it's really up to you. I find that having a mental story structure is always
Hmm.
helpful no matter what the medium is. You could
Hmm.
be creating a photo series, and having that intro and outro, even in my Instagram stories, really help me stand out from the way other folks express their stories.
Hmm.
So an outro could be, in fact, I've started to see this, is a looping element, right?
Hmm.
Somebody about to press a button, but then they
Hmm.
press the button in the
At the
intro,
beginning. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So then that looks like a smooth loop. Like, you
Hmm.
don't have to do that, right? The rules are there for their guidance. They're not
Hmm.
rules.
Yeah.
So I like to allow to leave room for my viewers, or those reels are found by anyone.
Hmm.
That's the beauty of Reels, that they're not just found by your followers. They're Instagram decides to showcase them to everyone, which
Hmm.
means there's going to be new people looking at your work. So how are they going to know it's you besides that little icon, and maybe
Hmm.
that is covered by all this text? So it's
Hmm.
helpful to introduce, which we will see here. I like to
Hmm.
introduce my logo mark at the end,
Hmm.
and that lets them know that, okay, well, this belongs to Sen. This is a
Hmm.
thing I can continue to see. And it's just branding strategy, really, at the end of
Yeah.
it. You can introduce like your YouTube, or maybe you have somewhere special you want people to check out your shop,
Hmm.
and this now becomes room for that to be done.
Yeah. I love
Yeah,
it. I love it.
it's a
Thanks
creative
for,
choice for sure.
yeah. And I think, one of the big things that I take away from that is however you choose to express yourself is the way you probably ought to do it.
Yeah.
What feels right, what comes naturally, and go for it. And as you said, that's how a lot of people do it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the rules. You know, you can kind of make that choice for yourself. Um, so you
I
are
want I
messing
wanted
with
to
clips
show
here.
you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
it's okay. I wanted to show you a little bit of a digital transition that I like to make.
Mhm.
You've probably, if you've my words today, if you've been able to kind of dive into video, you've noticed that there's a lot of in-camera transitions that you can make. But say you
Mhm.
didn't make those transitions,
Mhm.
then there are some tricks in post that you can do. One of the ones that I like to do is, for example, I like to go in here. You can see how zoomed in I am. This is why
Mhm.
it's so cool to like go in there and zoom out, have those shortcuts. So in here, I go slow. I'm at 30 frames per second, so that's just
Mhm.
our natural speed. And
Mhm.
then I speed this up. So then it goes into the next step.
Okay.
And you can see it's gonna, maybe the render will lag just a little bit, but right, you can see how
Mhm.
it's sped up. She's walking a lot faster. So the
Yeah.
way I achieve that, I'm going to show you here on this clip. So the way I achieve that is In this case, I'm going to undo that so you can see. I'm going to press the letter C so I can cut, right? So I can cut a part of the frame. And I think I'm going to choose like around this much, like a nice little chunk. And then I'm going to hit Command R, which is going to bring that clip speed duration. So the clip speed duration is also the area where you can slow down elements. And I know we're used to the phone just being able to do slow-mo by itself.
Yeah.
But this is natively how that happens. So here we can also reverse the speed, right? We can make my wife walk backwards. And we can do like a really cool effect. That's one of my favorite ways to make something. Remember boomerangs back in the days?
Yeah.
Make something look like it if you drop something and it pops back into your hand, right? You just hit reverse. In this case, we're going to speed it up, right? So I like to play with the numbers here and start somewhere like 200 or 500 and see how many seconds that gives me. That says that it will give me like around 6 seconds. So I'm going to do maybe like 400. Okay, so it's 1 second per each. So I'm going to do 200. No, 3. There. So that makes that a little bit visually a little bit shorter too, right? So that's already giving you that visual insight that it's going to be faster. So it's going to do the same thing. It's going to speed up to that area, right? So you have that, and that happened really fast there. Another thing to keep in mind is I'm going to hit I and O right here so that you can see that only this area is going to render as I'm previewing it, so it doesn't lag my computer.
That's so great.
Yeah,
that's awesome because yeah, I get stuck in like these little loops where I'm like, okay, now I gotta wait for this playhead to like go through every single part of my, project when I really just want to focus on the one transition I'm working on. So that's great.
And then another thing about this is that if, for example, you did have this all the way to the beginning and I'm all the way at the end, I can hit Shift I and it takes me back to the beginning.
Beautiful.
To wherever that is. So then I can browse the entire thing if I want to. But if I'm over here, the same thing will happen, right? So Shift I and it'll take me back to that.
To where you placed it. Oh, yes. Cool. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so it's really helpful. Just sometimes you want to see everything and sort of how it's flowing. That's a really helpful way to do that, to navigate, because the timeline starts to get really, really big at some point. So it is helpful to be able to just get there as quickly as possible. So I like to do those sort of transitions in between. And I'm going to do one, I think, at the end here. So I did manually speed it up with my hand, right? I think I had that in mind already. So I'm going to just reinforce that by doing Command R. And then we're going to do, let's say, 200. It gives me about 12 seconds. I could never decide how many seconds I want, but play with it, right? So then from here, this section, what it's doing is it's showing, just to go back to our story structure, is showing from the hotel to somewhere, right? And we're out in the city, and then we're going to be in a new place now. Yeah. Right. So these aren't particularly the same exact spot, but they're different perspectives of the city. So there is a common theme there. So we have at least 3 of those. Let's go into our museum footage. So something to keep in mind is to get to know your footage too a little bit better. I've been talking a little bit about 30 frames per second. I don't know why I didn't download a 60 frames footage, but I might be able to here just to show you. I have visibility in this column, frame rate. It shows me exactly the frame rate at which I recorded my footage. If you want to learn more about your footage and you have no idea what settings you had it on, you forgot, you can always go into properties, and it gives you this really simple explanation of your footage being almost 4K right here. It's usually a little bit smaller, and then it has 30 frames per second. What that tells me is that I can zoom in into my footage if I want to, and I won't lose quality because HD is 1080. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then if I had 60 frames, it tells me I can slow it down at 50%. Okay. And it would still be an acceptable smoothness. It'll be smooth. It won't be like twitchy and a little jagged. In the 90s, I think it was in the 90s. They didn't have a lot of that. So a lot
Hmm.
of movies I see, I can tell they try to slow something down and it just looks really jagged, but then that just now is very specific to that era.
Yeah, watching
Um
like
yeah.
80s or 90s films on like the new 4K TVs, one of the cringiest things in the world is like seeing those slow-mo scenes, and I'm like, what am I looking at? This is so bad. I'm like, I
Yeah.
can see. It's like you're showing me a slideshow of like pictures in pixel.
Yeah,
So
it's so
sometimes it's
weird. It's like,
funny. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think
Um,
that's so interesting to just like have that in mind in case you want to be able to create these effects in post.
mhm.
I'm just kind of looking here to see if I have it at 60 frames I can show you later. But yeah, that's a good way to get to know, be a little bit more involved and intimate with your footage so you understand what options you have
Yeah.
in post editing. Right.
Mhm.
So let's go in here. We're in the museum and it's beautiful in there, by the way. I think this was the MoMA Museum. And it was phenomenal, actually, just being in a space like this. This is one of those places where you ask yourself, like, why would I photograph this footage? Why would I record this vertical when in fact it's asking me to show the entire
Yeah.
panorama,
Yeah.
right? So I don't want my audience to miss out on that. And so naturally the pan was to the left to right, right? So
Hmm.
it's still kind of following that horizon.
Hmm.
Horizon, horizontal. A lot of us get confused, horizontal and vertical.
Yes.
And so I'm going to be using that kind of little clip there where I browse. So I look to the left and then go to the right. And you start to build this sort of strength to notice these behaviors, these actions, and the nuances of like someone looking up and maybe racing the camera up also, or
Hmm.
bringing in that moment when someone's about to grab something and maybe not giving the viewer the satisfaction of that grab, but switching
Hmm.
on to something else,
Yeah.
right? So then now you start to build that library of what actions am I looking for,
Hmm.
and if I can find them with my footage, great. And if not, I can create them, right?
Yeah.
I can choose to look left to right. I can ask my subject to like look up or
Hmm.
raise a hand, say hello, right? We
Yeah.
can actually do that. Yeah.
So with these transitions, we have like a really great question in the chat from PMAT here, which I think kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. Is that you've got these different transitions, as you say, and then we've gone from outside, kind of exploring the city into the museum. What do you do when it comes to like color grading and color correction? And which leads my brain. That's PMAT's question about
Oh
color grading
yeah,
and color correction, but then my
absolutely.
brain wants to add on to that,
Hmm.
making a cohesive piece when you are filming outdoors where it's very bright in the city and you have the shine from all the buildings and everything, and then you go into a more muted inside interior. How do you make it all feel like it belongs and,
Cohesive.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, cohesive?
Yeah, that's fair. Definitely even just going from room to room, you can start to see the
Yeah, the
tungsten light
difference.
versus, this kind of warmer light over here.
Hmm.
Obviously they're treating the artwork differently also
Yeah.
for, just to protect it. And so one of the basic things, definitely color correcting is its own little monster.
Hmm.
And so it does kind of take a little bit of time, but you can do some of the basic things that are going to help improve your footage so it looks a little bit more consistent and just help the phone's ability, right?
Hmm.
So I'm gonna go into in this right hand section and go into Lumetri Color,
Oh, okay.
right? And so in Lumetri Color, you're gonna see that my footage here has this little FX,
Hmm.
so kind of like effects, but it's grayed out. Grayed out. It's not. It doesn't have anything on it yet.
Hmm.
So what I want to do is go into my color balance because this looks really, really drastically different from the previous shot, and I'm
Hmm.
just gonna click on the outside area, and that
Oh.
already. I mean, we have a a machine learning
Hmm.
AI within our Adobe Creative family. Like it just we have so
Yeah.
many easy ways to improve our work in short ways, right? So that already kind of improved it there. I can go in here, and just like in photography, actually, this comes from my photography understanding of editing, color editing. I'm going to be more specific, and instead of jumping into exposure, I'm going to actually go into the highlights and try to improve those a little bit, bring up the shadows a little bit, right? So we're like being very specific to those
Yeah.
sections and not and being non-destructive. I
Yeah, and
think
already it starts to look like it
to that,
belongs in between those two clips that you
right?
have to the left and right.
And
And
even
that
this one,
wasn't
I
a lot
can,
of work to do that. It was like,
yeah,
boom, yeah, okay. I love it. It's better than
yeah,
me like tweaking teeny tiny things, and like I feel like I do when it comes to this part of the process, I do things the hard way. Whereas just that one little trick is probably going to save me about an hour in my own process now.
yeah.
So I love it.
Yeah, so different. And you can see here in my thumbnails, it still looks like the original, and you can see how much difference that really made, that single step.
Yeah.
Let's see.
But it looks like it's all like one happy family now, where instead of
Yeah,
going from like the cool tones to like almost like a warm sepia kind of vibe from the original clip into the kind of purple, like I would say that's like an amethyst lavender wallpaper over there, but it might look like a different color
very
to someone
specific.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my favorite color. I can't help it.
Yeah.
But it instead of it being like, you know, cool, warm, cool, now it seems all very cohesive, and like there's no, I'm not being blindsided by like this sudden change of tone. It feels like it
Absolutely.
all
Yeah.
belongs. So love it, love it.
So I'm gonna do this in a different way, just to give you more control over your effects.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we talked about adding some visual effects in our tracks, just to get a sense of like how to do something non-destructively. I'm gonna create a folder here called VFX,
Hmm.
and VFX are visual effects. It could be like, texture. It could be like adding some grain or adding a layout of Polaroid.
Hmm.
Sometimes I think all of those fall under the same category in my mind,
Yeah.
so I put them within this folder. In this case, I think just doing the color correction is also another effect to our image. You can also put it in its own folder,
Hmm.
whatever makes you feel a little bit more organized. So I'm going to go into new item and create an adjustment layer. So much like if you come from uh, Photoshop, for example, when we create an adjustment layer, it's not,
Hmm.
it's just sitting on top of that other layer and affecting it. And
Yeah.
it's not going to be direct, like completely embedded. So we're going
Hmm.
to create an adjustment layer. And in this adjustment layer, we can add anything. What's a little different here is that the adjustment layer collects all of the sequence settings of my video. So at the moment, we're at
Okay.
3,840, and we have 23 frames per second. Cool. It already knows what sequence I have, right? All the sequence settings I have. So I'm just going to hit OK. Not much to do there. And I'm just going to call this color correcting. Great. So then I'm going to just simply drag this over.
Hmm.
And what's cool about this is that I can choose whatever effect I put on this. I can choose how much of my B-roll it's covering and how
Yeah.
much of it is affecting. In this case, because I want to color correct the items that are outside in ambient lighting, which is this little blue section here of
Hmm.
just walking across the city, I'm going to only put it in that area. And you can see there, I labeled it a purple, so it's very visible and I can see it right away. I am actually going to put this above in this bar here, and I'm going to
Okay.
name this VFX.
So if
Right.
you want to add anything more or
If I want to add the text below, something like
yeah.
this, it'll still be affected. I mean, ideally, actually, I'm going to say that text probably lives higher than color
Hmm.
correcting. So that's something to think about. So in this color correcting, we can add um, any effect we want. That little effects, a button is gray, so it doesn't
Hmm.
have anything at the moment. So as we move through here, it's already on top of the layer and nothing has happened. But if I make it warmer or cooler,
Uh,
if I turn that off, let me just show you in a very drastic way. Let's make it kind of magenta. If I turn that off,
yeah.
right, it's it's no longer affecting it. So you see what's underneath there. So we didn't directly add those effects into the thumbnail. We actually added it to several shots all at once. And if I change my mind and I want to add that to something else, I can just drag it over.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Right. So in this, we're not going to use magenta. It looks cool, but kind of weird. So I'm going to actually do the color correction we talked about. And so I'm going to actually, well, let's not do that one, maybe that. And improve like a little bit of the highlights. Looks like it's kind of cool, actually. You can see the effects already changed. That means it's changing. I've added some effects in there. So that's another way to kind of know, is that layer live? Is there something on it? And so you can increase the colors and then you can play it. And it kind of has like a little bit more contrast. If I want to change, say for example, it's a little bit hard to kind of jump into these other ones because in video, it really does drastically shift things altogether. But say for example, if I want to change the shadows, right? So I want to change them to make it look a little bit more like this. See if I can see that in my preview. A little bit warmer shadows there, nothing too drastic. But all of these have kind of dive a little bit deeper into color correcting. I think my favorite one is just jumping into basic corrections, or if I want to get a little bit deeper, then I start going into this section, but that definitely is a little bit of a monster, right? Hue versus saturation, hue versus hue. It's not as easily like grasped. I think it's more, the way you want to think about it is that it's isolating different elements. It's isolating the saturation, it's isolating the hue, it's isolating the luminosity of that hue, and so on. So if you pick, let's say, for example, just show you an example since we're here. If I want to change the hue of that hue, right? I select that blue and it shows me these 3 little buttons, which is really cool. So that happened because I selected that hue. So that's the blue area. So if I start
okay, cool,
to modify that, right? I'm going to actually do it directly on it. Let me see. So it affects any blue. Of course, the sky is blue. We have different things that are blue. And so that's dealing with the hue of the hue.
And it does, sorry, I keep like talking over the tail end of your sentence there, but it fits, like, you know, so I'm not just like, oh, I want to change the color of the subject, which I would say like that's like what your eye is drawn to when you see this clip, but it also being able to change all related colors or all those hues at once kind of also it makes the entire shot more cohesive according to the new changes that you'd like to have, so then it doesn't look strange and perhaps super unnatural that you've changed the color of something so bold in your shot. Other things related to it transform as well, so it doesn't, I feel like the best changes to make to stuff like this are things that people don't notice you made the change. It just feels like that's subtle. How it was. So love it.
So what's interesting is that it is a great rule to have. I mean, a great like principle to have in photography also, even in design, just having that subtlety when I'm designing a layout for a magazine, almost not being able to see what the layout is, and it just navigating through it is it's almost like achieving that purpose. In the same way that if I edit a photo, and I think I was talking to a photographer yesterday that I ran into in a coffee shop, and it was so awesome because they photograph and film, and they were like really impressed with my editing not being too intense, right? Because they love the fact that film is so true to the moment, right? And so sometimes that subtlety, that principle of being subtle, it really helps in all sorts of mediums. So this area here is going to allow you to have more of that that focus on a specific thing. So the hue of the luma of the hue, right? Like the luminosity, how dark is it, how light is it? But it's not increasing the luminosity of anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Just the things that have that same color palette, which is what you chose. So the hue is what you're selecting first. I also decrease and increase the saturation, right? It's kind of like a tricky concept when you first look at it. It's not as easily understood, but once I started to play with it, I was like, well, if I select this red, it gives me those 3 little points in the red section, and I can change how strong that red is. Oh, sorry, lost it there. I can change how, because I click on the outside, or you can just create your own area of selection, right? Like that. And it shows me I wanted to saturate all the reds.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do that.
Pull it out, kind of make them fade into the background and really highlight a subject, perhaps.
Right. I'm going to undo all this for now. But yeah. The magic of undo is so satisfying.
Yes, it is great. Except, like, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I have done this so many times where I design digitally so often that when I'm doing things in my everyday life, I reach for Command Z. And I have done that before, like while I'm doing my makeup or something, I will be like, oh, don't like that stroke, and then like reach with my hand, and then I'm like, you are not on a computer. I do that. I have done that many times while like
that's so funny.
Doing my eyebrows or something. I will be like, that didn't look good, and then reach for Control Z or Command Z, and I'm like, I have achieved major nerd status. It is the time. This is the moment.
Okay, but you know what's crazy is that it's so relatable. That has totally happened to me. It's like you're cooking, you're doing something, you're like, oh, how I wish there was an undo button right now, because everything would just go back to normal.
Yeah.
So I
added too much salt. Better undo.
That's the hardest one to undo.
Yeah.
So I'm going to remove the attributes of that color adjustment, because I see here that I had it off. So then you can see how I was adjusting maybe those things. Maybe it wasn't subtle. So I'm going to remove attributes is one way to undo that, right?
Okay.
It's a different way. So you can see, what attributes do you want to remove? You created a Lumetri Color attribute. It's like, yes, I want to remove that. Okay, great. So now I can go in here and create an adjustment however I want to, right? Something like darker, or kind of change the white balance there a little bit, create a little bit more contrast. I'm trying to think of this blue hue up here. And since we've been using the curves, how about we select that blue hue and change it a little bit, because I'm a big fan of like a different sort of blue, like a little bit teal. So it starts to look really nice.
And just because I'm learning, and I'm really formulating a lot of this in my head in ways that I can understand from the creative background I have. So when you did what you just did, where you went through and you like cleared what had been applied, you kind of wiped the slate clean without getting rid of the adjustment layer altogether. So it's still there.
Exactly.
You can just kind of clean up what you have. And my brain, like what that looks like to me is almost like the equivalent of the Photoshop Smart Objects, where you can go in and you can see a list under that layer of all the different things that are applied, and you can hide or unhide them or get rid of them altogether while still keeping that that layer there. So maybe if anyone in the chat is learning here as well and kind of familiar with Photoshop or something, that's how that just registered in my brain, where I can remember that that's how that works, because it seems really similar. Like you can open
that's so
that
interesting, because I had a friend who knew how to use Premiere. So we did a little bit of an exchange, and I said, like, I'll teach you, I'll shoot your photos if you teach me Premiere. So we used to hang out in the same spot. So I was like, well, we're here already. And I remember saying, well, Premiere is a little bit like InDesign, because but he didn't know InDesign. But anyways, so I was like InDesign, because it's going to collect all the files from a different source, right? From outside. The files aren't embedded, they're linked. And he was like, yeah, I think that's the same.
Yeah.
I'm like, I had to relate it back to something I knew.
Yeah, something you're familiar with.
That's the beauty of like the Adobe Creative Cloud. Like I found myself teaching myself a new program in a different area, because a lot of the buttons are the same, a lot of the steps are the same. So it starts to feel very cohesive and easy to step into. Yeah. So you can see here, I added the color correction. I can remove that. And maybe if it's too strong, I can also go in here and bring down this little line here, and it actually decreases the opacity. So,
Nice.
so it's that easily accessible for me to just like change it.
I have been like going in and doing that the long way around, and now that I know that I can just kind of snag that
Yeah.
and do that so quickly, I am like that's one of the little tips that I'm taking away from today. That's just, it's a small thing, but it is going to make me feel so much more comfortable during my process and remove so much time, you know, kind of shave a bunch of time off the top of everything that I make, just knowing that.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to do the same exact step, and sometimes
Hmm.
some of them are a little bit more manual,
Hmm.
right? Just grabbing them. And then some of them are like, well, maybe it all lives in the effects control and I can just adjust that in here anyhow, right? Like you can
Hmm.
see that reflected here. It's at 41% now. And when I like raise it up, that line goes up.
Hmm.
Right. So it's a few different areas for you to just like have quick access to them. And so I'm gonna continue to introduce the last set here, which is the coffee section as we like kind of go into our time.
Hmm.
So I can show you guys a little bit of like that auto reframe before we go get to crazy.
Okay. And Wade is saying,
So
yes, making those connections really does kickstart the learning process. Absolutely agree, 100%. But please continue.
yeah. Yeah, it does take a little bit of time, even for me, just coming from photography. The hard part was just sort of I want to say reframing, but
Mhm.
yeah, reframing in a figurative way. My way of thinking of photography to like start to think of like, how do I introduce this into something that moves, and
Mhm.
how do I use it? How do I start to tell a story with it?
Mhm.
Which I think is the hard part. The
Yeah.
editors, I respect editors so much now, and I didn't really understand it before as well.
Mhm. I feel the same way. Nothing like kind of diving into somebody else's realm of expertise to really teach you a lot about them, you know?
Yeah,
And it's, I kind of felt the same way, kind of like, okay, I've been painting this whole time, but what if I wanted to make a tutorial, or what if I wanted to just talk, you know? And then I dive into it. I'm like, everybody I have ever known that does this, I respect you so much more, because this is just different and similar in many ways, but just like a different way of thinking that I can really appreciate. Like, you've been doing this this whole time. This is
yeah.
crazy.
Right. It
So,
just takes to try to do it once, and you're just
mhm,
like, okay, wow, this is really awesome.
this is a whole
It,
thing.
it yeah, it's a good way to understand that most things look easy from an outsider's perspective,
Hmm.
but it can definitely, I just assume that it's like 40% harder at
Yeah.
least.
Well, you know, and you can see that, like, this video that you're making, about how long would you say it's going to end up being at its completion? Like, when it's
Um,
finished and ready to post, how long does it last?
I think like most of the time, it all depends of how much I want to do.
Hmm.
I don't really remember how long. I know on Instagram you can actually do like a whole movie.
Yeah,
I
like
may
you
be
can have
wrong,
like a video, and then I
but
think that like the reel is 90 seconds, is it? I
right.
think.
And in YouTube Shorts is 60 seconds.
Hmm.
So it's something to think about. Where do
Yeah.
you kind of want to reshare these items?
Hmm.
And that could help you kind of mitigate like the length.
Hmm. But then we're sitting here for an hour and a half, you know, putting
Oh
this
yeah,
together and
right.
formulating this. So it's like every reel that you see, even though the story it tells is very quick, especially, you know, these reels that are like literally an entire story in like just a few seconds, you know? Um, it's like you never really understand just how much work it took to be able to tell a story so flawlessly in such a short amount of time, until you actually dive into it and start to put one together yourself, and then you realize this is different, you know, and this takes a lot of finesse to be able to, you know, take hours of footage, compress it down into 45 seconds, and show it to me and have me see your entire trip to New York and
Yeah.
understand what you went through during that trip and feel it, you know?
Yeah, you definitely, you know, make your studio space comfy. I have
Mm-hmm.
a little pillow here, you know, just knowing that you got to enjoy the process as much as the output,
Mm-hmm.
because that this part can be a lot of fun if you get really into it. And you know, this is definitely a personal part of the entire process that's only yours.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, when you're taking the footage, maybe friends are involved. When
Mm-hmm.
you're sharing it, everyone's involved, but editing it is definitely just you,
Mm-hmm.
except now. But it's one
Except
of
right
those.
this moment.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to so this has a little bit of audio. We're not gonna hear it right now because I'm speaking, but this does have an audio waveform that I decided to bring in. There's a little section here where I say smile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like smile to the camera.
Mm-hmm.
So let me like increase that so you guys can see. Sometimes I could actually not have any headphones and I would
Mm-hmm.
still know where things happen because of the way the audio is changing,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to do here, because this would be in fact a great test, being that it's mute, for what often happens, it's a human behavior on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
is that we don't actually turn on the audio. Oftentimes we're maybe on commute
Yes.
or we're in our office. So this would be a great way to kind of note that is on one side, we want to make it accessible to everyone. So having
Mm-hmm.
captions on is really helpful. And you can do that natively in Premiere. So we're going to do that now.
I'm
And it
so
also adds,
excited.
yeah, it also adds a little bit of an element there, which is, I think it's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I went to the wrong side. It's okay.
This
We
is
decrease and go here.
I'm so fascinated by this because I did not know this at all because whenever I watch Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, I'm always like sitting on my own with the sound on and like watching the videos. But I hear that a lot of people are watching these reels with no sound because they're in a
Yeah.
public space. They're on their commute, as you
Yeah.
say, or in the office or on a break or whatever. And so I never understood why all of a sudden there's so many captions on these videos. And I wasn't sure if I needed to do that in some of my own videos. But the understanding now of how most people consume this particular kind of video content is
Yeah.
so like
Exactly.
interesting and makes so much sense now why
And
that is the way that they are done. So I love this that we are getting into it.
yeah, it's so interesting because you're part, you know, in your creative workflow, but you're also analytical because you
Hmm.
consider the strategies that you're trying to play on, and well, how can I help my viewer experience or digest this information better?
Hmm.
You know, you have your own standards of what you're trying to achieve. Maybe it's all entertainment and it's fun. It's an insider view into your life, or you want to also kind of include an entire group of people that may not be able to have the ability to hear. I mean,
Hmm.
that in itself is important. So accessibility is also valuable
Yeah.
there. So just keeping that in mind just like opens it up for like so many people out there. So in this case, I'm gonna add the subtitles, and it actually picked up the audio of a person talking in the back because of the way we were talking about how we didn't have, like, if you don't have that audio on, it
Hmm.
collects information from the back.
Hmm.
That's okay. So the AI didn't get the text that I wanted. I can still edit it myself. So I'm going to go in here and write the word smile, but not in caps. So smile.
Just a shout.
Yeah. Smile.
Smile.
Come on.
Do it.
So then that was a little bit more vicious between the two
I,
clicks. Smile.
yeah.
So we're gonna do create captions. That doesn't quite create the captions yet. This was just an analysis of the audio. So we're gonna go here and create captions. And in this section, you can leave everything as it is. Once you
Mhm.
start to create your own styles, you can actually select it beforehand if you have a particular style that you want
Mhm.
your font to be. And for now, I'm just going to make sure it's single because there's only one word here. But
Mhm.
if you have several sentences, but you don't, it maybe the rhythm of the song is really fast, then you don't want to make it two lines. You do want to absolutely make it single lines, right? So
Mhm.
just think about the momentum of your video. I'm going to do single lines in this case and click OK. And then you can see here, it's created a new section right above it. Let's see if we can bring this up. This is why I like my my items horizontally, because you can't see this. Well, it's right here. It's really tiny and it doesn't need to be that visible because it doesn't have any thumbnails, visuals or anything. But you can see in there, it says smile. If for any reason the word actually doesn't appear here, it actually appeared around here, right? Like where my playhead is, I can just move that along.
Nice.
And it'll appear in that little section. I can make it shorter, right? So this is basically a text. So treat it in the same way. What's going to be valuable is that it does create all these texts around your basically syncing with your lips and the way that you speak if you're speaking in that moment. So, you know, having that control is really helpful.
Yeah, this is great.
So it shows up here at the very bottom.
Nice.
Cool. So I'm just going to change that font because it's fugly. And sorry, font. Oh, it's Myriad Pro. I mean, of course. So I'm going to go for my favorite, Cooper. I'm just going to put smile there, and then I can actually increase or decrease the size if I want to. We can make it kind of look old school and do that yellow because it's something that like it's very true to the subtitles that used to be in movies.
Yeah.
Like a little black stroke. It's not the cutest, but it has like a nostalgic element.
But it feels natural because you've seen it somewhere before. Like it feels like that's, I love it.
And so you can choose to move this up or down. I think in this case, I'm going to move it a little bit up, right? So there's more visibility. And cool. So you can see, I tell her to smile like around here. She's so serious. I'm like, smile. And it's like, and then she smiles.
She's like, okay.
Great. Okay, fine. And so she was very fixated on the sugar here. So I'm going to go and probably end it right here at the, that's a good transition at the, I think it was like a lemon tart.
Looks delicious, whatever it is.
Oh, it was so good. It's especially delicious because you're just like in a beautiful ambiance. So yeah, it's nice. So you can see how cool that looks, like that transition. You start to see it.
Because the moment I see that top-down view, I'm like, what is that? It looks delicious. And then it goes directly to like
a little bit
yourself
of
a bite. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so again, about collecting those like variations of clips, having like a zoomed in version could be really helpful. And sometimes not completing an action can help. Like it doesn't go all the way down, it leaves you with that gap, and then you can have an outro in that moment, right? So you're like, yep, it's almost like saying by cutting it and not doing that entire completion, it leaves almost like in a song where it sort of fades out. So you just feel like, does it continue even though I'm not hearing it? It has that effect.
Well, it's like a like almost like impressionism in painting. Like, you know, you don't have to paint something with perfect photorealistic clarity. You just have to suggest that it's there in the painting and the mind will fill it in. It's kind of the same here, where you showed us the plate, you showed us the spoon snagging a bite and all of those things, but in my head I'm seeing the process of you sitting across from her and reaching to take a bite and eating it. Like I'm experiencing all those things even though you're not showing me every single moment of that day. I still feel like you're impressing upon me, like we went here and here, we had this wonderful meal, and I feel it even though it's not physically present in the video. I assume, as you say, does it go on when I'm not looking at it? Did it go on after this even though I can't see it anymore? And I believe that it's true.
Yeah, it's kind of, and it's so interesting that you compare it to different things in general, because it just you really don't know where you grab your inspiration from. Sometimes it doesn't have to be from another videographer, it doesn't have to be from another photographer. It can quite literally be another genre altogether. I mean, like, for example, my brother-in-law is a fishing guide, and
Okay.
just in the way he's very, it seems completely out of the realm of creativity of what we're talking about right now, but the way that he has to wait to catch the fish reminded me of street photography,
Oh,
because
yeah.
of the way I had to wait in a moment and just sort of imagine the behavior of this person as they cross the bound that I have selected in order for them to like just pass by, and in order for me to be able to capture the shot. It was almost the same in the way, in that way, and it gave me a different respect. I was even more for his craft, and I was absolutely intrigued, and that was so cool to kind of make that comparison. You really don't know where that inspiration comes from.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
really great to hear you talk about that, because in a way, like, now that you've made the correlation between the two, I could definitely see it. For sure.
Yeah. So in this exit and the outro, I'm actually going to reverse it, because I'm really liking how it just like closes it. Well, she's opening it here, and then it zooms in, right? So we're going back to our intro and showing that same scene again, but a new perspective. And so that kind of does that connection, more figurative looping sort of thing. So, but I like it more when it goes this way and then it closes, because that feels like closing a moment, right? So I'm going to actually hit Command R again and hit reverse in this case. And so it's going to go back. So now when I put my playhead in the beginning, it does this and then it goes back.
Oop. I love it.
Right. Yeah. So I want that little transition to be a little bit faster from right here. So I'm actually hit Command R and make that a little bit faster. Let's see how much faster. At 1,000, it gives me 11 seconds. So let's see if it's still visible or it's right. So that'll close. It's a little right now. It looks a little bit like, sometimes that's kind of cool because sometimes it's a little bit playful.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just the rendering. It might look a little smoother once you exit it. So before we run out of time, I definitely want to share with you like two more things that I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, we have about 20 minutes, just to like give you a heads up. So great. Also to everyone in the chat, we have 20 minutes left. So if you folks have any questions or anything at all you've been wondering about, now is a great time to get them in chat so we have time to get to your questions. But awesome. Please continue.
So in my outro, like we mentioned earlier, I like to introduce my logo and maybe a goodbye or a footer or somewhere else that they can connect with me. So I use this so often that I've actually saved it into my essential graphics panel. So instead of adding the icon, I actually just went and saved it. And the way you can do that is just right-clicking and add as a motion graphics template.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Yeah. So then you have access to that. So if it had a motion, I don't put anything on this one just because I leave it open to doing other things. But if it had a motion, like if it zoomed in or it did any of those things like opacity, it would also collect that data and have it as a template there for me to access, which is really helpful.
I love just the iconic look here of the sea within the within the little spy. What was that?
Yeah.
I don't know what the word for that is. Like the little peep.
I don't know.
You know?
I don't like that name.
Yeah,
it's a little troubling.
It's strange.
Yes. Yeah, there's bound to be a better name. Usually like the French have like cool names for things.
We should look it up and figure it out. Yeah. Much more stylish name for the strange version we have.
Yeah. So I also have this a slogan or outro that I like to say. I like to say with love and then my name on it. I think it's always great to share a moment of kindness or anything you want to say. I think it's just a little space for you to say goodbye, right? So you can choose it for anything you want. I can also add my website here, or I can also include, like I said, my shop. In this case, I really just want to say goodbye. And so this is what I choose to do. And so I'm going to go in here and decrease the sizing because it's a little bit big. And so I can decrease the sizing of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't decrease the sizing of the box. So I'm actually going to select the timeline, and that should be able to help me decrease it. Mm-hmm. Or that's moving it. What's this? Somewhere there.
Yeah.
I think if I select it up here on the text, you can see the text panel up here too. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to go into your timeline at all. And I'm going to increase the tracking a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think 250 tends to be what I like. And
kind of breathes a little bit more.
Yeah.
Love it.
So then I can include a little bit of those effects so that cross dissolve can be introduced. Just drop it in there. It's just like the easiest thing. Mm-hmm. That's one of those handy elements, right? So now it comes in, mm-hmm.
and then it goes
smoothly.
Out. Love it.
Right. And I can put it maybe a little bit towards the end, and I'm gonna put my out here so that I know this is also going to help me to tell Premiere where I want the video to end. So that's the only elements that I want exported.
Yeah.
Right. So if we go to the beginning, Shift I right at the beginning, you can start to sort of see a little bit of that.
It almost looks like you knock and like burst that text away when you do that knocking at first. And I just think it's so cool.
Yeah. I think I removed something there. I'm just going to close that. Cool. Maybe the song can go on here and you just know. It goes from, especially in the intro, you want to go a little bit faster. So it has that time and that intrigue. But then you can just take your time and have your pace. Because I think one of my least favorite things about Instagram Reels is that kind of footage where it feels like flashing neon signs, right? Mm-hmm. They're like disturbing. Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna jump on board with that. So I like to kind of take my time.
Yeah, I like that. And I have just like talking about Reels and stuff, I have a question of my own with regards to like the final product and where to put it. Just some general advice I'm looking for, I guess, because I've come to a point making, kind of experimenting with making my own Reels and stuff, is I want to make one and I would like to share it for YouTube Shorts and for Instagram Reels. But the Instagram Reels, you can do up to 90 seconds and the YouTube Shorts, you can do 60 seconds, I believe, unless it's vice versa. I think and so I'm thinking to myself, like, do I make a reel that is 90 seconds long, but at the 60-second mark have a place where I could stop the content naturally, so I have a full 60 seconds and then the extra 30 seconds for Instagram? Or do I sacrifice the last 30 seconds of the Instagram reel so that all of the content I post is uniform on each platform?
I think that's definitely one of those solutions of your reel should be as long as it should be. Like that's it. It's not if it's supposed to be 20 seconds long because that's where the story feels quite right. Great, stop it there, and that's don't go any further. If 60 seconds is like, or actually this one's like a 90-second one, then let IG Reel kind of rejoice in that. But if you do want I do think that's one of those things where, like, don't force it. But if you do want like a particular solution, I can always, I like to nest things. So like you can always nest this item. So it's basically groups it, right? So I can nest my outro and then choose to introduce it say 60 seconds. Say it was a lot closer to here. I can choose to introduce my intro by just pulling it over and having it here.
And then you can see if it, if if it
And
works
then,
well.
okay, well, I have to tell Premiere my out is about here.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when I export, it will only export up until this point, and this area will not be exported.
And then I could have, you know,
And
like
that's
a version
like
that's
3
60.
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
To just have that variation. When you export here, since we do have that horizontal viewpoint, you do have access natively in Premiere to export directly to YouTube, to Vimeo, to Twitter. I mean, Behance is right here too. So I mean, it's awesome. You can just sign in and you have already like all your specs. It starts to ask you questions that are particular for YouTube, and you can publish directly from Premiere, which is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, just to get your workflow like that much smoother. I think that's really helpful. I'm definitely trying to build my YouTube rhythm in itself, and that like it takes like a little while. You're like, okay, and then you become like a making machine and you can't stop yourself. So
yeah.
you know, it's really nice to have that workflow not be like, okay, I do this here, but then I have to do 3 more steps somewhere else.
Yeah.
So before we do that, I do want to have a vertical version. So I'm gonna go into you can see here now I have an outro sequence because I nested that. That's another thing that happens when you nest items. They become their own area, almost, if we're comparing it to things, almost like a smart object, right? We can go into a smart object, make edits in there.
And then it's still the smart object, but you've kind of tinkered with the mechanical parts of it.
Exactly. So if I change the font here or I move it around, that's going to be reflected in the original file, which is super cool. Yeah.
Nice.
Vector files. Comparisons work. Yeah.
So I'm going to go, by the way, he really loves all the publishing options, like being added where you can sign in and do all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I was pleasantly surprised to see that in there. So I'm going to go into the sequence that we named New York version 1, and we're going to right click it and go into a section called auto reframe sequence. And in the auto reframe sequence, we have some presets. We have some target aspect ratios that we're going to be working with. So if we know our social platforms, we know that Instagram 1x1 is still a choice. Vertical, if you want to take up more of that phone space, and then 4x5 on the grid, 9x16 on Reels and Stories. So that kind of doubles up. 9x16 also on YouTube. So I think I'm going to go with 9x16 in this case. You can tell Premiere that this is actually a super fast edited sequence. Like it has a lot of fast moving parts. Or you can tell it that it's pretty slower. Let's see which one works, because we do have a few fast sections, but I think this should be fine. I'm going to put Don't Nest Clips for now, and then I'm going to hit create. And it's going to take a little time to just sort of create that vertical version. And so it started at the beginning, which we have a black start to black, and it just shows kind of a vertical version of the same. It followed Mo there, but we can also move those steps, right? It's trying to find the subject, and a lot of these horizontals may not work. I did give it a challenge, right? It's looking for faces, it's looking to center certain elements, and I think it's doing a pretty good job. I did create some compositions based on a horizontal aspect ratio, which I can then start to play with, and I'll show you kind of like a different solution for that. But for the most part, here we are, and we're now a lot smaller too. Something that you don't see visibly is that we're no longer at 4K. Okay, this is 1080, which was 1920 by 1080, the biggest width. So 1080 by 1920.
Yes.
So it's going to be lighter, which means what this means is that you're not going to let Instagram shrink your footage on its own accord and possibly ruin it. You already have those specs in place, and that's going to help so that your quality remains the same. So I'm going to go into, I think there's one here that I was like, no, but what about Matisse? Matisse, you can't see Matisse anymore. So what I'm gonna do is actually right click and put set frame to size.
Okay.
I think it's set frame to size or scale frame to size, scale frame. Okay. And I'm gonna go into my effects control and sort of select this item. I think it was this one. Okay. And I'm going to change the position of this. So I have my auto reframe and I want to adjust the position. Let's see if I can do this here directly. That was one of my solutions. Let's see if that actually lets me do it. Here it is. Okay. So nice. That way, and this you might have already like kind of seen, but this is possibly the layout that is just going to help you kind of keep that horizontal composition that you had. You did it on purpose for a reason. So maybe you're able to kind of just keep that in there. Some of them, they look great like this, right? And some of them, they really don't. So we're going to want to change that. And then for this one, I think that's actually kind of cool. And that's the way you sort of you begin to play with it. Now, if you want to actually adjust this, and I wanted to show the other side, for example, then I'm going to go into my reframe settings here and adjust that position here. And you can just start to see, like, let me see if I can do, I think my anchor is over here. We can always do it manually. Maybe I want to show me instead. So you can always shift that, and that adjustment will be sort of reattributed in that area.
Yeah, I love it. I wonder, I was thinking to myself too, if it would be interesting if you could kind of keyframe some movement in there if it showed. I think that's Frida in the painting, or at least that's what it looked like.
So go from the left to the right.
Yeah, to pan it, you kind of
so essentially that's what it's doing. It's manual. It's doing the artificial version of what you would do manually, which is zoom in into the shot, center it sort of in this area when it hits this time. And so it's doing it for you, and then you go in there and adjust it. It could be a little bit fickle for me to kind of jump in there and adjust something that's already pre-done. So if something like that happens, actually, now thinking about it, I can always right click it and remove attributes, and I think that's going to remove that auto frame on that one. Oops. I also remove the color. I don't want to remove the color, so I actually have the choice to not do that.
We worked really hard on that color.
Yeah, really hard.
really hard on that.
So then now I have that, and I can move it a little bit more freely in the way that I know how to move it, without it being, so I can actually say it begins here, right? So I can actually set that scale there and get to this place and say it starts to then scale open, and it shows that. This might be a little bit drastic because the time is short.
Yeah, we've got maybe 4 or 5 minutes left here too, by the way. So it's really,
so it's really helpful in this, and I hope we got a chance to learn this, is that in Premiere in general, we want to be able to kind of develop our own story that's going to be able to be served for different platforms. Using the out of frame feature makes that fairly simple, so you don't have to kind of have to choose whether you want vertical or horizontal, even if you want to salvage that horizontal footage, which sometimes I do, right? And so I definitely suggest for you to kind of step into creating a story structure that definitely has helped me in mitigating all the crazy footage. And I hope this just like helped everyone get a better sense of the UI and how to get more familiar with it. I know it can be daunting oftentimes, but once you get used to all these different sections, it gets really easy to be creative, right? Because we know our tools. Like, I don't quite know how to use a knife, but then like once you know how to use it, it's like, well, I know what to use it for. And
you have that confidence. you know, going into it in the future. And I can say without a doubt, after sitting here and hanging out with you for a couple hours, I feel so much more confident about my next kind of dive into video editing for sure. I have learned so much from you today, and I'm probably going to go back and kind of rewatch some of the things that we've done as I work through my own projects, just
Yeah.
so that I can make sure I get the hang of things. And I know we had some questions in the chat from Annika asking about using the
Yeah.
caption features natively. We did go over that
Yeah,
during
we
the
did.
show. So you should check out the replays too
The
if you want to
repeat.
go back, because we just have a couple of minutes here, but I would love to give you some time now that we're kind of coming to the end of our show. Sin, if you would like to give us any last minute advice or information, let us
Yeah.
know where we can find you, how we can stay up to date on all of your work, and what's coming next in the wonderful world of Sin Lagos.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I mean, definitely I'm always up to a lot of different things, but one of my current focuses is film and the education of photography.
Mm-hmm.
I am creating a class around the same concept
Mm-hmm.
in Skillshare. So I'm
Okay.
self-producing it. It's so awesome. I'm so
Oh,
excited because it's like this alone has helped me learn a lot of the things that I'm teaching you today.
mm-hmm.
So definitely check out or keep up with me on Instagram, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Now YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Nuts. I never thought I would say that, but yes.
I'm on YouTube
Uh
now.
yeah.
That's
It's like
great.
why not? Why haven't I
Mm-hmm.
made that decision? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're creatives. We're like a
Mm-hmm.
little crazy sometimes.
But I'm trying
So
to do the same
yeah.
thing, you know, you kind of dip into new creative realms and stuff, which is
Yeah.
why opportunities like this to come and watch you work and see
Yeah.
your adventures and your journey is so valuable and so awesome. But it has
Yeah, keep
been
up with
such a
me here
pleasure.
too. Yes, one of my favorite places to be is Behance too, because this community is so awesome and
Mhm.
really respects our craft. And so I really enjoy being here, and I love that I had you hosting me today. Can't say that
I
enough.
was honored to be able to host you.
Yeah.
So this has been awesome. I don't want to get cut off, however, because I know we were like kind of on the cusp of our time here, but
Yeah.
it was an absolute honor and pleasure hanging out with you, Sin.
Yeah.
Everybody, it has been super great hanging out with you today. Please stay tuned. Don't go anywhere because we have a bunch of wonderful content coming up after this, which we definitely want to hang out with you for again. And we will see you around the Creative Bend, folks.
Yeah.
Adios, everybody. Thank you, Sin.
Thank you.